Let's talk now, though, to Douglas Murray, author on Democracies and Death Cults, Israel, Hamas and the Future of the West. His new book is out. It's been launched out there by HarperCollins. It's got great reviews, not least by Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America. Douglas, a very good morning to you.
Very good to be with you, Mike.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you've been very busy. I've been watching a lot of the interviews you've been giving over the course of the last few days and weeks, many of them in the States, some of them here as well. And I'm fascinated by your treatise, really, that this is not just about Israel defending its country. It's not just about a terror group trying to attack another country. It's about really the future of the West, as it says on the front of the book. And it struck me that you've talked a lot about the reaction in the West, the reaction in London, in New York, in other countries, in colleges around the United States of America. And I wanted to ask you this, really. I mean, because I've got a theory that the reason why so much of this is happening is because there are so many people around the world who are not just sympathetic to Palestine, they're actually from Palestine.
Well, that's certainly true. I say in the book, I mean, it follows on from the themes of a number of books of mine, including The Strange Death of Europe. It follows on from a theme that I thought about there. The book is about, on Democracies and Death Cults, is about the October the 7th massacres in Israel and the nature of the group that carried out that massacre, Hamas. It's about my first-hand account, not just of what happened on the 7th of October, but of Israel's response. I was with the IDF in Gaza, Lebanon, and elsewhere. But the main thing that I wanted to address outside of the region is this question of, since this was the largest mass killing of Jews since the Second World War, since the Holocaust, why are there so many people who are willing to say that, not everyone, but some, and so few people willing to say, well, who are the Nazis? And why are there so many of their supporters among us? And Mike, what your question alludes to is something which I say in the book. I say one of the reasons is one of the drivers of the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas marches in the last 18 months has been Muslims who hate Jews. As straightforward as that. They have brought a conflict and a theological hatred of their own that they've nurtured, and they've brought it into Britain. They say we would like to kill the Jews first, but everyone else next. They mean it. They mean it. And this is what makes the conflict in the Middle East crucial to the rest of us as well.
It really does. And I wonder as well what on earth it means for the next stage of this conflict, as you say, because you've said in some of the interviews that, you know, this could happen here.
Well, Mike, it has. I mean, this is one of the heartbreaking things about all of this. I spoke to one of the survivors of the Nova Party. It was dancing in the morning at 6:30 with hundreds of other young people when Hamas, by the thousands, came in, invaded the country, came in and massacred and raped and beheaded and killed and kidnapped their way through that party. One of the young men who survived has a terrible story, but which I relate in the book, said to me, what would you do if this had happened in your country? And I thought, but didn't say, but it has. Not on this scale, but it has. We had the Manchester Arena bombing where Salman Abedi, of the Abedi family, who for some curious reason, a family of jihadists, were given birth in the UK so that he took one British girl for every year of life this country gave him. We had the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando. We had the Bataclan massacre in Paris in 2015. We have had tasters of this. It's just that whenever we've had tasters of it at a far lesser scale, but when we've had tasters of it, we in our society try to pretend it away. What were we told after the Manchester Arena bombing? But don't look back in anger. Why? Why not look back in anger when your daughters are murdered? Yeah. Your children are killed. Why don't you have the right to look back in anger? And it's the same in each of these cases. And I say that in this fight between the death cults like Hamas ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and we, the liberal democracies, the free countries like Israel, Britain, France, America, we have the right to draw the most crucial line of all, which is to say, our side or theirs, on the side of the democracies or on the side of the death cults. And if you're on the side of the death cults, you cannot be with us.
Yes. But going back to the numbers of people living certainly in this country, I know less about America at the moment than I used to. But in terms of the numbers of sympathisers, shall we say, with the cause of Palestine, and in some cases even with the cause of Hamas, you know, I mean, I remember the 70s. I remember the Six-Day War. I remember the Golan Heights being on the news every night when I was growing up in the 70s. You know, there were never any sorts of demonstrations on the streets. There was none of that, because my contention is the people who are now doing those demonstrations weren't here.
No, I mean, of course. I mean, as I said in a book almost 10 years ago, The Strange Death of Europe, if you import the world's people, you import the world's problems. And we have imported this problem. Britain has an extraordinary, long existing number of Jews and Jewish community in the UK. They have been central to the UK for 1,000 years. But when we imported millions of people from Pakistan and elsewhere who are of the Muslim faith, we brought in Muslim anti-Semitism and Muslim anti-Westernism. Yeah. What percent people can argue about. But we know, for instance, that even if 1% of the people who come to this country are pro-death cult, are pro-Hamas, pro-ISIS, pro-Al-Qaeda, that is a number of people more than we used to have. Yeah. I was doing a BBC interview last night, and the interviewer deliberately pretended not to be able to understand this point, but it's obvious. Mm. If the Plymouth Brethren were currently massacring people in a proportion of their faith, let's 2% of Plymouth Brethren, and we imported millions of people who were Plymouth Brethren to the country, we would get a percentage of them who wanted to continue their violence here. Yeah. Everybody knows this. Nobody in Britain can say this, and nobody in Britain, crucially, will do anything about this. But they should have done by now, and they can do now.
Well, of course, now we've got a South London law firm calling themselves a human rights representation, acting for Hamas, they say, which surely I would have thought must be illegal, and trying to get their prescribed status changed by the government.
Yes. Mike, deport, deport, deport. We have no place in this country for people who want to worship death and bring death and celebrate death. We have no place for them. Deport, deport, deport. Get them out.
And what about Benjamin Netanyahu, before we finish up on Israel? There are plenty of people in Israel who think he has got a lot of blame to be taken onto his shoulders for what happened. He gets criticised by certain sections of the media there. I mean, what do the people of Israel that you've met say? What do you think of the way he's been conducting the war?
Well, by the way, he's riding high in the polls in Israel, and that's for a reason, which is that, as I say in the book, my first-hand account of this war, he managed. There were undoubtedly intelligence and military failures on the 7th, undoubtedly, unarguably, and I explained some of those, how that could have happened. But within a year of the war being started by Hamas after their invasion, within a year of the war starting, Benjamin Netanyahu and his war cabinet, his colleagues, had managed to decimate the leadership of Hezbollah, decimate the leadership of Hamas. And as we speak, the Iranian revolutionary government in Tehran, that is the sponsor, backer, trainer, and armor of these groups, is quaking because it knows that it could be next, that the head of the snake could be attacked. This is because of the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet. Some people have many criticisms about this. Many people have some criticisms. But any Israeli leader of left and right who I have spoken to may differ on some of the specifics, but all agree on one thing. If you get 1,200 of your citizens murdered in a day, burned alive in their houses, beheaded, raped, and 250 taken hostage, you're going to respond. You have the right to respond. They have responded. People may quibble about which means they've responded with, but we in Britain, if we had thousands of our citizens murdered in this way and killed in their homes and thousands more taken hostage, we would assert our right, I would like to think, to also be able to go after our enemies, kill or capture them, and to get our hostages back, as Israel has the right to get hers back.
And watching the demonstrations in Gaza against Hamas was kind of a surreal experience, wasn't it? Because I remember thinking to myself, there's more people demonstrating against Hamas in Gaza than there are in London. Is that the beginning of something?
It could be. It could be. I'm afraid that I'm not enormously hopeful about that. The citizens of Gaza voted the terrorist group death cult Hamas into power after the Jewish state withdrew every Jew in 2005. If there is an uprising against Hamas within Gaza, it's long overdue. There have been very brave Gazans, including one who rose up, was tortured and killed by Hamas, and his body dumped on his parents' doorstep the other day. I wish that these people had stepped up faster. Is it that they are pro living in peace with their neighbors, or is it because they are fed up with the desolation that Hamas has brought to them by starting this war? I don't know. That one's hard to see. But yes, it's long overdue for there to be an uprising against Hamas in the Gaza. And I hope very much that Hamas can be got out. It's imperative. I'll tell you why, because if you vote for a death cult and you bring in a death cult to lead you, it's not only that it is devastating for your neighbors, as it was for Israel on October the 7th, it's devastating for the society that Hamas purported to run. They brought death not only to the Jews and the Jewish nation, they brought it to their own people too. And that is because in a fight between democracies and death cults, it is a fight between groups who worship death and the rest of us who love and cherish life.
One more on what happened here yesterday. On the papers this morning, full of the world of common sense, a common sense revolution perhaps beginning. We like a lot of common sense here at Talk. Finally, the Supreme Court has defined a woman, which has embarrassed the hell out of Keir Starmer, who hasn't said anything about it, and embarrassed the hell out of an awful lot of politicians who for many years couldn't actually do it.
Well, you know, I wrote a book about this some years ago called The Madness of Crowds. And I wrote about this problem and said what was happening and what I think needs to happen. That there are many conservatives and others who are celebrating this morning that our courts can recognize the difference between biological females and biological males. But you know, Mike, I cannot see it as a great victory. I see it as a victory. I cannot see it as a great victory that our greatest legal minds have been sitting around trying to work out what the difference between men and women is, and if there is one. Feels so retarded to be going at that speed, and for our finest legal minds to be having to apply themselves to such a stupidly obvious question. We were lied to about this for years. I'm glad this has happened. But why don't we ask the next question? Why were we being made to do this? Why, when it was so patently untrue, were we being force-fed this pap? Let's find the people who did it and make sure they are the ones who face the courts now. Let's find the mutilators and the others, and let's make sure they are held accountable, including the politicians who oversaw that period and encouraged it through their ignorance and cowardice.
Very well said. Thank you very much indeed. Douglas Murray, the book is On Democracies and Death Cults, Israel, Hamas and the Future of the West. There it is. It's out right now with HarperCollins. Douglas Murray, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. This is Morning Glory.